Welcome to today's Triple Z. The Triple Z podcast is a daily program that you can use to help you fall asleep each night. Just turn down the volume, lay back, relax, and enjoy as you fall asleep. We saw that our podcast was topping the charts in Myanmar, so we are going to read their Wikipedia entry. Let's learn about this interesting country in the dullest way possible. If you enjoy our program, please be sure to write us a review on your podcast platform and share us with a friend. You both might sleep just a little better at night. Our website is Triple Z, that's 3zs.media. You can also like and share our content on Facebook or our Instagram account ZZZ Media Podcast. Music for today's episode was provided by the Sleep Channel on Spotify. Music for today's episode was provided by the Sleep Channel on Spotify and Apple Music. Myanmar, officially the Republic of the Union of Myanmar, also known as Burma, the official name until 1989, is a country in Southeast Asia. It is the largest country by area in mainland Southeast Asia and has a population of about 55 million. It is bordered by Bangladesh and India to its northwest, China to its northeast, Laos and Thailand to its east and southeast, and the Andaman Sea and the Bay of Bengal to its south and southwest. The country's capital city is Naypyidaw, and its largest city is Yangon, formerly Rangoon. Early civilizations in the area included the Tibeto-Burman speaking Phaya city-states in Upper Myanmar and the Mon kingdoms in Lower Myanmar. In the 9th century, the Bamar people entered the Upper Irrawaddy Valley, and following the establishment of the Pagan kingdom in the 1050s, the Burmese language, culture, and Theravada Buddhism slowly became dominant in the country. The Pagan kingdom fell to Mongol invasions, and several warring states emerged. In the 16th century, reunified by the Taungoo dynasty, the country became the largest empire in the history of Southeast Asia for a short period. The early 19th century Konbaung dynasty ruled over an area that included modern Myanmar and briefly controlled Manipur and Assam as well. The British East India Company seized control of the administration of Myanmar after 3 Anglo-Burmese wars in the 19th century, and the country became a British colony. After a brief Japanese occupation, Myanmar was reconquered by the Allies. On January 4, 1948, Myanmar declared independence under the terms of the Burma Independence Act, 1947. Myanmar's post-independence history has continued to be checkered by unrest and conflict. The coup d'état in 1962 resulted in a military dictatorship under the Burma Socialist Program Party. On August 8, 1988, the 88-88 uprising then resulted in a nominal transition to a multi-party system 2 years later, but the country's post-uprising military council refused to cede power and has continued to rule the country through to the present. The country remains riven by ethnic strife among its myriad ethnic groups and has one of the world's longest-running ongoing civil wars. The United Nations and several other organizations have reported consistent and systemic human rights violations in the country. In 2011, the military junta was officially dissolved following a 2010 general election, and a nominally civilian government was installed. Aung San Suu Kyi and political prisoners were released, and the 2015 Myanmar general election was held, leading to improved foreign relations and eased economic sanctions, although the country's treatment of its ethnic minorities, particularly in connection with the Rohingya conflict, continued to be a source of international tension and consternation. following the 2020 Myanmar general election, in which Aung San Suu Kyi's party won a clear majority in both houses. The Burmese military, Tatmadaw, again seized power in a coup d'etat. The coup, which was widely condemned by the international community, led to continuous ongoing widespread protests in Myanmar and has been marked by violent political repression by the military, as well as a larger outbreak of the civil war. The military also arrested Aung San Suu Kyi in order to remove her from public life and charged her with crimes ranging from corruption to the violation of COVID-19 protocols. All of the charges against her are politically motivated, according to independent observers. Myanmar is a member of the East Asia Summit, Non-Aligned Movement, ASEAN, and BIMSTEC, but it is not a member of the Commonwealth of Nations despite once being part of the British Empire. Myanmar is a dialogue partner of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The country is very rich in natural resources such as jade, gems, oil, natural gas, teak, and other minerals, as well as also endowed with renewable energy, having the highest solar power potential compared to other countries of the Great Mekong subregion. However, Myanmar has long suffered from instability, factional violence, corruption, poor infrastructure, as well as a long history of colonial exploitation with little regard to human development. In 2013, its GDP nominal stood at $56.7 billion and its GDP PPP at $221.5 billion. The income gap in Myanmar is among the widest in the world, as a large proportion of the economy is controlled by cronies of the military junta. Myanmar is one of the least developed countries. As of 2020, according to the Human Development Index, it ranks 147 out of 189 countries in terms of human development, the lowest in Southeast Asia. Since 2021, more than 600,000 people were displaced across Myanmar due to the surge in violence post-coup, with more than 3 million people in dire need of humanitarian assistance. The name of the country has been a matter of dispute and disagreement, particularly in the early 21st century, focusing mainly on the political legitimacy of those using Myanmar versus Burma. Both names derive from the earlier Burmese Myanmar or Mrama, an ethnonym for the majority Burman ethnic group of uncertain etymology. The terms are also popularly thought to derive from Sanskrit Brahma Desha, land of Brahma. In 1989, the military government officially changed the English translations of many names dating back to Burma's colonial period or earlier, including that of the country itself. Burma became Myanmar. The renaming remains a contested issue. Many political and ethnic opposition groups and countries continue to use Burma because they do not recognize the legitimacy or authority of the military government. The country's official full name is Republic of the Union of Myanmar, Burmese, Paitongsa the Mata Myanmar Nanganta, pronounced. Countries that do not officially recognize that name use the long-form Union of Burma instead. In English, the country is popularly known as either Burma or Myanmar. In Burmese, the pronunciation depends on the register used and is either Bama, pronounced, or Myanmar, pronounced. Official United States foreign policy retains Burma as the country's name, although the State Department's website lists the country as Burma, Myanmar. The United Nations uses Myanmar, as does the ASEAN, and as do Australia, Russia, Germany, China, India, Bangladesh, Norway, Japan, Switzerland, and Canada. Most English-speaking international news media refer to the country by the name Myanmar, including the BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, Reuters, and the Australian Broadcasting Corporation (ABC/Radio Australia). Myanmar is known by a name deriving from Burma in Spanish, Italian, Romanian, and Greek. French-language media consistently use Burmese. There are at least 9 different pronunciations of the English name Myanmar, and no single one is standard. Pronunciations with 2 syllables are found most often in major British and American dictionaries. Dictionaries, such as Collins and other sources, also report pronunciations with 3 syllables. As John Wells explains, the English spellings of both Myanmar and Burma assume a non-rhotic variety of English, in which the letter R before a consonant or finally serves merely to indicate a long vowel. So the pronunciation of the last syllable of Myanmar as or of Burma as by some speakers in the UK and most speakers in North America is in fact a spelling pronunciation based on a misunderstanding of non-rhotic spelling conventions. Archaeological evidence shows that Homo erectus lived in the region now known as Myanmar as early as 750,000 years ago, with no more erectus finds after 75,000 years ago. The first evidence of Homo sapiens is dated to about 25,000 BP, with discoveries of stone tools in central Myanmar. Evidence of Neolithic age domestication of plants and animals and the use of polished stone tools dating to sometime between 10,000 and 6,000 BCE has been discovered in the form of cave paintings in Podolin caves. The Bronze Age arrived c. 1500 BCE when people in the region were turning copper into bronze, growing rice and domesticating poultry and pigs. They were among the first people in the world to do so. Human remains and artifacts from this era were discovered in Manawa district in the Sagaing region. The Iron Age began around 500 BC with the emergence of ironworking settlements in an area south of present-day Mandalay. Evidence also shows the presence of rice-growing settlements of large villages and small towns that traded with their surroundings as far as China between 500 BCE and 200 CE. Iron Age Burmese cultures also had influences from outside sources such as India and Thailand, as seen in their funerary practices concerning child burials. This indicates some form of communication between groups in Myanmar and other places, possibly through trade. Around the 2nd century BCE, the first known city-states emerged in central Myanmar. The city-states were founded as part of the southward migration by the Tibeto-Burman-speaking Paya people, the earliest inhabitants of Myanmar of whom records are extant, from present-day Yunnan. The Paya culture was heavily influenced by trade with India, importing Buddhism as well as other cultural, architectural, and political concepts, which would have an enduring influence on later Burmese culture and political organization. By the 9th century, several city-states had sprouted across the land, the Paya in the central dry zone, Mon along the southern coastline, and Arakanese along the western littoral. The balance was upset when the Paya came under repeated attacks from Nanzhao between the 750s and the 830s. In the mid to late 9th century, the Bamar people founded a small settlement at Bagan. It was one of several competing city-states until the late 10th century, when it grew in authority and grandeur. Pagan gradually grew to absorb its surrounding states until the 1050s, 1060s, when Anuradha founded the Pagan kingdom, the first ever unification of the Irrawaddy Valley and its periphery. In the 12th and 13th centuries, the Pagan Empire and the Khmer Empire were 2 main powers in mainland Southeast Asia. The Burmese language and culture gradually became dominant in the upper Irrawaddy Valley, eclipsing the Paya, Mon, and Pali norms by the late 12th century. Theravada Buddhism slowly began to spread to the village level, although Tantric, Mahayana, Hinduism, and folk religion remained heavily entrenched. Pagans, rulers, and wealthy built over 10,000 Buddhist temples in the pagan capital zone alone. Repeated Mongol invasions in the late 13th century toppled the 4-century-old kingdom in 1287. Pagan's collapse was followed by 250 years of political fragmentation that lasted well into the 16th century. Like the Burmans 4 centuries earlier, Shan migrants who arrived with the Mongol invasions stayed behind. Several competing Shan states came to dominate the entire northwestern to eastern arc surrounding the Irrawaddy Valley. The valley too was beset with petty states until the late 14th century, when two sizable powers, Ava Kingdom and Hanthawaddy Kingdom, emerged. In the west, a politically fragmented Arakan was under competing influences of its stronger neighbors until the Kingdom of Meraku unified the Arakan coastline for the first time in 1437. The kingdom was a protectorate of the Bengal Sultanate at different time periods. In the 14th and 15th centuries, Ava fought wars of unification but could never quite reassemble the lost empire. Having held off Ava, the Mon-speaking Hanthawaddy entered its golden age, and Arakan went on to become a power in its own right for the next 350 years. In contrast, constant warfare left Ava greatly weakened, and it slowly disintegrated from 1481 onward. In 1527, the Confederation of Shan states conquered Ava and ruled Upper Myanmar until 1555. Like the pagan empire, Ava, Hanthawaddy, and the Shan states were all multi-ethnic polities. Despite the wars, cultural synchronization continued. This period is considered a golden age for Burmese culture. Burmese literature grew more confident, popular, and stylistically diverse, and the second generation of Burmese law codes as well as the earliest Pan-Burma chronicles emerged. Hanthawaddy monarchs introduced religious reforms that later spread to the rest of the country. Political unification returned in the mid-16th century through the efforts of Taungoo, a former vassal state of Ava. Taungoo's young, ambitious king Tabin Shwedi defeated the more powerful Hanthawaddy in the Taungoo-Hanthawaddy War. His successor Bayanang went on to conquer a vast swath of mainland Southeast Asia, including the Shan states, Lan Na, Manipur, Mang Mao, the Ayutthaya Kingdom, Lan Xang, and southern Arakan. However, the largest empire in the history of Southeast Asia unraveled soon after Bayanang's death in 1581, completely collapsing by 1599. Ayutthaya seized Tenasserim and Lan Na, and Portuguese mercenaries established Portuguese rule at Thanlyin, Sirium. The dynasty regrouped and defeated the Portuguese in 1613 and Siam in 1614. It restored a smaller, more manageable kingdom encompassing Lower Myanmar, Upper Myanmar, Shan states, Lan Na, and Upper Tenasserim. The restored Taungoo kings created a legal and political framework whose basic features continued well into the 19th century. The crown completely replaced the hereditary chieftainships with appointed governorships in the entire Irrawaddy Valley and greatly reduced the hereditary rights of Shan chiefs. Its trade and secular administrative reforms built a prosperous economy for more than 80 years. From the 1720s onward, the kingdom was beset with repeated Meitei raids into Upper Myanmar and a nagging rebellion in Lan Na. In 1740, the Mon of Lower Myanmar founded the restored Hanthawaddy Kingdom. Hanthawaddy forces sacked Ava in 1752, ending the 266-year-old Toungoo dynasty. After the fall of Ava, the Konbaung-Hanthawaddy War involved one resistance group under Alongpaya defeating the restored Hanthawaddy, and by 1759 he had reunited all of Myanmar and Manipur and driven out the French and the British, who had provided arms to Hanthawaddy. By 1770, Alongpaya's heirs had subdued much of Laos and fought and won the Burmese-Siamese War against Ayutthaya and the Sino-Burmese War against Qing China. With Burma preoccupied by the Chinese threat, Ayutthaya recovered its territories by 1770 and went on to capture Lan Na by 1776. Burma and Siam went to war until 1855, but all resulted in a stalemate, exchanging Tenasserim to Burma and Lan Na to Ayutthaya. Faced with a powerful China and a resurgent Ayutthaya in the east, King Bhattapaya turned west, acquiring Arakan 1785, Manipur 1814, and Assam 1817. It was the second largest empire in Burmese history, but also one with a long, ill-defined border with British India. In 1826, Burma lost Arakan, Manipur, Assam, and Tenasserim to the British in the First Anglo-Burmese War. In 1852, the British easily seized Lower Burma in the Second Anglo-Burmese War. King Mindon Nin tried to modernize the kingdom and in 1875 narrowly avoided annexation by ceding the Karenni states. The British, alarmed by the consolidation of French Indochina, annexed the remainder of the country in the Third Anglo-Burmese War in 1885. Konbaung kings restored Toungoo's administrative reforms and achieved unprecedented levels of internal control and external expansion. For the first time in history, the Burmese language and culture came to predominate the entire Irrawaddy Valley. The evolution and growth of Burmese literature and theater continued, aided by an extremely high adult male literacy rate for the era, half of all males and 5% of females. Nonetheless, the extent and pace of reforms were uneven and ultimately proved insufficient to stem the advance of British colonialism. In the 19th century, Burmese rulers sought to maintain their traditional influence in the western areas of Assam, Manipur, and Arakan. Pressing them, however, was the British East India Company, which was expanding its interests eastwards over the same territory. Over the next 60 years, diplomacy, raids, treaties, and compromises, known collectively as the Anglo-Burmese Wars, continued until Britain proclaimed control over most of Burma. With the fall of Mandalay, all of Burma came under British rule, being annexed on January 1, 1886. Throughout the colonial era, many Indians arrived as soldiers, civil servants, construction workers, and traders, and, along with the Anglo-Burmese community, dominated commercial and civil life in Burma. Rangoon became the capital of British Burma and an important port between Calcutta and Singapore. Burmese resentment was strong and was vented in violent riots that periodically paralyzed Rangoon until the 1930s. Some of the discontent was caused by a disrespect for Burmese culture and traditions. Buddhist monks became the vanguards of the independence movement. Uwisara, an activist monk, died in prison after a 166-day hunger strike. On April 1, 1937, Burma became a separately administered colony of Britain, and Ba Maw became the first Prime Minister and Premier of Burma. Ba Maw was an outspoken advocate for Burmese self-rule, and he opposed the participation of Britain, and by extension Burma, in World War II. He resigned from the Legislative Assembly and was arrested for sedition. In 1940, Before Japan formally entered the war, Aung San formed the Burma Independence Army in Japan. As a major battleground, Burma was devastated during World War II by the Japanese invasion. Within months after they entered the war, Japanese troops had advanced on Rangoon, and the British administration had collapsed. A Burmese executive administration headed by Ba Maw was established by the Japanese in August 1942. Wingate's British Chindits were formed into long-range penetration groups trained to operate deep behind Japanese lines. A similar American unit, Merrill's Marauders, followed the Chindits into the Burmese jungle in 1943. Beginning in late 1944, Allied troops launched a series of offensives that led to the end of Japanese rule in July 1945. The battles were intense, with much of Burma laid waste by the fighting. Overall, the Japanese lost some 150,000 men in Burma, with 1,700 prisoners taken. Although many Burmese fought initially for the Japanese as part of the Burma Independence Army, many Burmese, mostly from the ethnic minorities, served in the British Burma Army. The Burma National Army and the Arakan National Army fought with the Japanese from 1942 to 1944, but switched allegiance to the Allied side in 1945. Overall, 170,000 to 250,000 Burmese civilians died during World War II. Following World War II, Aung San negotiated the Panglong Agreement with ethnic leaders that guaranteed the independence of Myanmar as a unified state. Aung San Suu Kyi, Bomuang, Sermong Jiwai, Sain Myamong, Myomayuthan Kaiwi were among the negotiators of the historic Panglong Conference, negotiated with Bamar leader General Aung San and other ethnic leaders in 1947. In 1947, Aung San became deputy chairman of the Executive Council of Myanmar, a transitional government. But in July 1947, political rivals assassinated Aung San and several cabinet members. On January 4, 1948, the nation became an independent republic under the terms of the Burma Independence Act, 1947. The new country was named the Union of Burma, with Sacha as its first president and U Nu as its first prime minister. Unlike most other former British colonies and overseas territories, Burma did not become a member of the Commonwealth. A bicameral parliament was formed, consisting of a Chamber of Deputies and a Chamber of Nationalities, and multi-party elections were held in 1951 to 1952, 1956, and 1960. The geographical area Burma encompasses today can be traced to the Panglong Agreement, which combined Burma proper, which consisted of Lower Burma and Upper Burma, and the frontier areas, which had been administered separately by the British. In 1961, U Thant, the Union of Burma's permanent representative to the United Nations and former secretary to the Prime Minister, was elected Secretary General of the United Nations, a position he held for 10 years. When the non-Burman ethnic groups pushed for autonomy or federalism, alongside having a weak civilian government at the center, the military leadership staged a coup d'etat in 1962. Though incorporated in the 1947 Constitution, successive military governments construed the use of the term federalism as being anti-national, anti-unity, and pro-disintegration. On March 2, 1962, the military led by General Ne Win took control of Burma through a coup d'etat, and the government had been under direct or indirect control by the military since then. Between 1962 and 1974, Myanmar was ruled by a revolutionary council headed by the general. Almost all aspects of society, business, media, production were nationalized or brought under government control under the Burmese Way to Socialism, which combined Soviet-style nationalization and central planning. A new constitution of the Socialist Republic of the Union of Burma was adopted in 1974. Until 1988, the country was ruled as a one-party system, with the general and other military officers resigning and ruling through the Burma Socialist Program Party, BSPP. During this period, Myanmar became one of the world's most impoverished countries. There were sporadic protests against military rule during the Ne Win years, and these were almost always violently suppressed. On July 7, 1962, the government broke up demonstrations at Rangoon University, killing 15 students. In 1974, the military violently suppressed anti-government protests at the funeral of U Thant. Student protests in 1975, 1976, and 1977 were quickly suppressed by overwhelming force. In 1988, unrest over economic mismanagement and political oppression by the government led to widespread pro-democracy demonstrations throughout the country known as the 8888 Uprising. Security forces killed thousands of demonstrators, and General Samong staged a coup d'etat and formed the State Law and Order Restoration Council, SLORC. In 1989, SLORC declared martial law after widespread protests. The military government finalized plans for People's Assembly elections on May 31, 1989. SLORC changed the country's official English name from the Socialist Republic of the Union of Burma to the Union of Myanmar on June 18, 1989 by enacting the adaptation of the Expression Law. In May 1990, the government held free multi-party elections for the first time in almost 30 years, and the National League for Democracy, NLD, the party of Aung San Suu Kyi, won, earning 392 out of a total 492 seats, i.e., 80% of the seats. However, the military junta refused to cede power and continued to rule the nation, first as SLORC and, from 1997, as the State Peace and Development Council, SPDC, until its dissolution in March 2011. General Thanchet took over the chairmanship, effectively the position of Myanmar's top ruler, from General Samong in 1992 and held it until 2011. On June 23, 1997, Myanmar was admitted into the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. On March 27, 2006, the military junta, which had moved the national capital from Yangon to a site near Pyongyang in November 2005, officially named the new capital Naypyidaw, meaning the City of the Kings. In August 2007, an increase in the price of fuel led to the Saffron Revolution led by Buddhist monks that were dealt with harshly by the government. The government cracked down on them on September 26, 2007, with reports of barricades at the Shwedagon Pagoda and monks killed. There were also rumors of disagreement within the Burmese armed forces, but none was confirmed. The military crackdown against unarmed protesters was widely condemned as part of the international reactions to the Saffron Revolution and led to an increase in economic sanctions against the Burmese government. In May 2008, Cyclone Nargis caused extensive damage in the densely populated rice farming delta of the Irrawaddy Division. It was the worst natural disaster in Burmese history, with reports of an estimated 200,000 people dead or missing, damages totaled to $10 billion, and as many as 1 million were left homeless. In the critical days following this disaster, Myanmar's isolationist government was accused of hindering United Nations recovery efforts. Humanitarian aid was requested, but concerns about foreign military or intelligence presence in the country delayed the entry of United States military planes delivering medicine, food, and other supplies. In early August 2009, a conflict broke out in Shan State in northern Myanmar. For several weeks, junta troops fought against ethnic minorities including the Han Chinese, Wa, and Kachin. During 8 to 12 August, the first days of the conflict, as many as 10,000 Burmese civilians fled to Yunnan in neighboring China. Civil wars have been a constant feature of Myanmar's socio-political landscape since the attainment of independence in 1948. These wars are predominantly struggles for ethnic and subnational autonomy, with the areas surrounding the ethnically Bamar central districts of the country serving as the primary geographical setting of conflict. Foreign journalists and visitors require a special travel permit to visit the areas in which Myanmar's civil wars continue. In October 2012, the ongoing conflicts in Myanmar included the Kachin conflict between the pro-Christian Kachin Independence Army and the government, a civil war between the Rohingya Muslims and the government and non-government groups in Rakhine State, and a conflict between the Shan, Lahu, and Karen minority groups and the government in the eastern half of the country. In addition, Al-Qaeda signaled an intention to become involved in Myanmar. Armed conflict between ethnic Chinese rebels and the Myanmar Armed Forces resulted in the Kokong Offensive in February 2015. The conflict had forced 40,000 to 50,000 civilians to flee their homes and seek shelter on the Chinese side of the border. During the incident, the government of China was accused of giving military assistance to the ethnic Chinese rebels. Clashes between Burmese troops and local insurgent groups have continued, fueling tensions between China and Myanmar. The military-backed government had promulgated a roadmap to discipline flourishing democracy in 1993, but the process appeared to stall several times until 2008, when the government published a new draft national constitution and organized a flawed national referendum which adopted it. The new constitution provided for election of a national assembly with powers to appoint a president, while practically ensuring army control at all levels. A general election in 2010, the first for 20 years, was boycotted by the NLD. The military-backed Union Solidarity and Development Party declared victory, stating that it had been favored by 80% of the votes. Fraud, however, was alleged. A nominally civilian government was then formed, with retired General Thein Sein as president. A series of liberalizing political and economic actions, or reforms, then took place. By the end of 2011, these included the release of pro-democracy leader Aung San Suu Kyi from house arrest, the establishment of the National Human Rights Commission, the granting of general amnesties for more than 200 political prisoners, new labor laws that permitted labor unions and strikes, a relaxation of press censorship, and the regulation of currency practices. In response, United States Secretary of State Hillary Clinton visited Myanmar in December 2011, the first visit by a U.S. Secretary of State in more than 50 years, meeting both President Thein Sein and opposition leader Aung San Suu Kyi. Aung San Suu Kyi's NLD party participated in the 2012 by-elections, facilitated by the government's abolition of the laws that previously barred it. In the April 2012 by-elections, the NLD won 43 of the 45 available seats. The 2012 by-elections were also the first time that international representatives were allowed to monitor the voting process in Myanmar. Myanmar's improved international reputation was indicated by ASEAN's approval of Myanmar's bid for the position of ASEAN chair in 2014. General elections were held on November 8, 2015. These were the first openly contested elections held in Myanmar since the 1990 general election, which was annulled. The results gave the NLD an absolute majority of seats in both chambers of the national parliament, enough to ensure that its candidate would become president, while NLD leader Aung San Suu Kyi is constitutionally barred from the presidency. The new parliament convened on February 1, 2016, and on March 15, 2016, Tin Kyo was elected as the first non-military president since the military coup of 1962. On April 6, 2016, Aung San Suu Kyi assumed the newly created role of State Councillor, a role akin to a Prime Minister. In Myanmar's 2020 parliamentary election, the ostensibly ruling National League for Democracy, NLD, the party of State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi, competed with various other smaller parties, particularly the military-affiliated Union Solidarity and Development Party, USDP. Suu Kyi's NLD won the 2020 Myanmar general election on November 8 in a landslide. The USDP, regarded as a proxy for the military, suffered a humiliating defeat, even worse than in 2015, capturing only 33 of the 476 elected seats. As the election results began emerging, the USDP rejected them, urging a new election with the military as observers. More than 90 other smaller parties contested the vote, including more than 15 who complained of irregularities. However, election observers declared there were no major irregularities. However, despite the Election Commission validating the NLD's overwhelming victory, the USDP and Myanmar's military persistently alleged fraud. In January 2021, just before the new parliament was to be sworn in, the NLD announced that Suu Kyi would retain her state councillor role in the upcoming government. In the early morning of February 1, 2021, the day parliament was set to convene, the Tatmadaw, Myanmar's military, detained Suu Kyi and other members of the ruling party. The military handed power to Military Chief Min Aung Hlaing and declared a state of emergency for 1 year and began closing the borders, restricting travel and electronic communications nationwide. The military announced it would replace the existing election commission with a new one, and a military media outlet indicated new elections would be held in about 1 year, though the military avoided making an official commitment to that. The military expelled NLD party members of parliament from the capital city, Naypyidaw. By March 15, 2021, the military leadership continued to extend martial law into more parts of Yangon, while security forces killed 38 people in a single day of violence. By the second day of the coup, thousands of protesters were marching in the streets of Yangon, and other protests erupted nationwide, largely halting commerce and transportation. Despite the military's arrests and killings of protesters, the first weeks of the coup found growing public participation, including groups of civil servants, teachers, students, workers, monks, and religious leaders, even normally disaffected ethnic minorities. The coup was immediately condemned by the United Nations Secretary General and leaders of democratic nations. The U.S. threatened sanctions on the military and its leaders, including a freeze of $1 billion of their assets in the U.S. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Russia, Vietnam, Thailand, the Philippines, and China refrained from criticizing the military coup. A United Nations Security Council resolution called for the release of Aung San Suu Kyi and the other detained leaders, a position shared by the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. International development and aid partners, business, non-governmental, and governmental hinted at suspension of partnerships with Myanmar. Banks were closed and social media communications platforms, including Facebook and Twitter, removed Tatmadaw postings. Protesters appeared at Myanmar embassies in foreign countries. The National Unity Government then declared the formation of an armed wing on May 5, 2021, a date that is often cited as the start of a full-scale civil war. This armed wing was named the People's Defense Force, PDF, to protect its supporters from military junta attacks and as a first step towards a federal union army. The civil war is ongoing as of 2024. Myanmar has a total area of 678,500 square kilometers, 262,000 square miles. It lies between latitudes 9 degrees and 29 degrees north and longitudes 92 degrees and 102 degrees east. Myanmar is bordered in the northwest by the Chittagong division of Bangladesh and the Mizoram, Manipur, Nagaland, and Arunachal Pradesh states of India. Its north and northeast border is with the Tibet Autonomous Region and Yunnan for a Sino-Myanmar border total of 2,185 kilometers, 1,358 miles. It is bounded by Laos and Thailand to the southeast. Myanmar has 1,930 kilometers, 1,200 miles, of contiguous coastline along the Bay of Bengal and Andaman Sea to the southwest and the south, which forms 1/4 of its total perimeter. In the north, the Hunduan Mountains form the border with China. Kakabo Razi, located in Kachin State at an elevation of 5,881 meters, 19,295 feet, is the highest point in Myanmar. Many mountain ranges, such as the Rakhine Yoma, the Bago Yoma, the Shan Hills, and the Tenasserim Hills exist within Myanmar, all of which run north to south from the Himalayas. The mountain chains divide Myanmar's 3 river systems, which are the Irrawaddy, Salween, Thanwin, and the Sitong rivers. The Irrawaddy River, Myanmar's longest river at nearly 2,170 kilometers, 1,348 miles, flows into the Gulf of Morbihan. Fertile plains exist in the valleys between the mountain chains. The majority of Myanmar's population lives in the Irrawaddy Valley, which is situated between the Rakhine Yoma and the Shan Plateau. Myanmar is divided into 7 states and 7 regions, formerly called divisions. Regions are predominantly Bamar, that is, mainly inhabited by Myanmar's dominant ethnic group. States, in essence, are regions that are home to particular ethnic minorities. The administrative divisions are further subdivided into districts, which are further subdivided into townships, wards, and villages. Below are the number of districts, townships, cities/towns, wards, village groups, and villages in each division and state of Myanmar as of December 31, 2001. Much of the country lies between the Tropic of Cancer and the equator. It lies in the monsoon region of Asia, with its coastal regions receiving over 5,000 millimeters, 196.9 in, of rain annually. Annual rainfall in the Delta region is approximately 2,500 millimeters, 98.4 in, while average annual rainfall in the dry zone in central Myanmar is less than 1,000 millimeters, 39.4 in. The northern regions of Myanmar are the coolest, with average temperatures of 21 degrees Celsius, 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Coastal and delta regions have an average maximum temperature of 32 degrees Celsius, 89.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Previously and currently analyzed data, as well as future projections on changes caused by climate change, predict serious consequences to development for all economic, productive, social, and environmental sectors in Myanmar. In order to combat the hardships ahead and do its part to help combat climate change, Myanmar has displayed interest in expanding its use of renewable energy and lowering its level of carbon emissions. Groups involved in helping Myanmar with the transition and move forward include the UN Environment Programme, Myanmar Climate Change Alliance, and the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environmental Conservation, which directed in producing the final draft of the Myanmar National Climate Change Policy that was presented to various sectors of the Myanmar government for review. In April 2015, it was announced that the World Bank and Myanmar would enter a full partnership framework aimed to better access to electricity and other basic services for about 6 million people and expected to benefit 3 million pregnant women and children through improved health services. Acquired funding and proper planning has allowed Myanmar to better prepare for the impacts of climate change by enacting programs which teach its people new farming methods, rebuild its infrastructure with materials resilient to natural disasters, and transition various sectors towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions.